Welcome to the center of the universe and the home of the 18-time Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts. This is the X's and Argos podcast with Ben Grant and JB.
Welcome to the X's and Argos pregame walkthrough, brought to you by Something in the Water Brewing. Ben Grant, joined as always by JB, and we are here to get you set for a game that you may have been dreading all season long. Friday the 13th, BC Place. The Toronto Argonauts take on the BC Lions and have a chance to exercise some demons in what has been a tough place for them to play over the last few years, although I'm going to challenge that notion in our game preview. That's one of the things we got coming up today. Also coming up, we are going to talk about Adarius Pickett's comments about Chad Kelly. Also look at where Coach Dinwiddie stands right now. I know a lot of fans seem to have lost confidence in him, and I want to address that. We'll also talk about the power rankings, and I know Argos fans got really upset about some of those too. And so we'll look at the different power rankings and why it's okay that the Argos are not necessarily doing well in those rankings. And we'll look at realistic expectations from here to the end of the season, plus a little bit of transaction news, pick six, game previews, injury reports, OCDC, one thing, predictions, put me down for 20, and our CFL picks, all that and more coming up on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. JB, Friday on, not this coming Friday in BC, the following Friday, the 27th, where the Argos take on the Hamilton Tiger Cats. It'll be the first home game. I've got the date wrong on that. Friday 20th, sorry, not the 27th. Friday the 20th. This Friday is the 13th. The following Friday, the 20th, that is the Argos' first home game in a long, long time after this 3-game road trip. And Something in the Water Brewing is going to be doing something special that day. It's a Friday night game at BMO Field. Something in the Water is located in Liberty Village, steps from BMO Field. You want to drop by before the game. You can grab yourself some longboat. You can sit down on the patio. Hopefully it's going to be some nice weather, some nice after work, pre-game weather, and you can enjoy some great beer from Something in the Water. They're going to have some great food. They're going to have contests. They're going to have giveaways, all sorts of good stuff coming up. And I'll be there as well. JB, you're going to be able to make the trip out? We'll have to see if our schedules align. I believe so. Yeah, that'd be great if you could be there too. I know it's always a treat. No one cares about meeting me, but they love meeting you because you're a man of mystery.
That's true.
So so we'll hopefully both be there on the 20th. So make sure you come out to Something in the Water and join us there for the pregame for the Hamilton Tiger Cats game. But for right now, we're talking about the BC Lions. We're talking about this game. We're talking about Friday the 13th. But let's start things off with, I think, one of the most controversial things we've had going on in a while, and that was Adarius Pickett's comments post-game after Toronto's loss, specifically about Chad Kelly. He also kind of threw a bit of shade at Coach Dinwiddie. But the line from Chad Kelly, the line about Chad Kelly, I wanted to take issue with. So he said, I hit Chad in the backfield. It looked like he was seeing ghosts from there. He looked like just like he did in the East Final game. And those are pretty sharp words from a former teammate. I didn't see that at all from Chad Kelly. I know if you just look at the interceptions column, that's to me the only thing you can tie between Chad Kelly's performance last week in Ottawa and the East Final game. The East Final performance from Chad Kelly was the worst game he's ever played. It's the worst game of his career, no question. In Ottawa last week, I actually thought he played okay. If you want some more information on why I thought that, I wrote an article for 3 Down Nation that you can check out detailing why it looked like he didn't actually play well in a game where I actually think he did play well. I think there were some factors that led to some of those interceptions that weren't entirely on him. He made mistakes too, but I don't think that's a game where Chad Kelly was seeing ghosts or where he looked anything like how he did in the East Final. What was your take on it?
That wasn't my. I mean, it's hard to tell, but he in the Eastern Conference meltdown looked well. If it was not the result of something post concussion, it looked like somebody who was on tilt. I don't know how else to explain it. That they were just not seeing the field properly. That was not the case, I thought, against Ottawa. I thought that Ottawa was more like a run-of-the-mill, threw a couple of bad passes, got a couple of bad breaks.
And like in the East Final game, he threw balls that I just like, why are you throwing that? And I didn't see that in the game against Ottawa. There were interceptions, but they weren't from bad reads. They were from throws that were either predetermined or reads that were correct, but either the ball sailed away because it's pouring rain, or it got tipped up in the air. Or one interception, he was hit as he threw. And that was the last one, the 2-point conversion. His arm gets hit as he releases the ball, and so it goes fluttering away. And again, you don't blame the quarterback for those. I thought he made some good decisions. Again, it's not a perfect game. I'm not saying that he was the MVP of the game and the week and everything else. Of course not. But to say that was anything like the East Final is it's just wrong. And Adarius Pickett, he was an awesome player last year for Toronto. I think he's having a great season with Ottawa. I think he really wanted to come back to Toronto. I think he felt like this place was special, and I understand like that would have been really hard in the offseason, thinking that you're coming back to this team where you were the best defensive player in the league, and then you don't get contacted. And I think there's some bitterness and some anger there. And so I think that's more what we're seeing than truth to his statements.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like he's twisting the knife a little. I mean, obviously, to get that back into the news cycle and to talk about Kelly's worst game ever, and this game where things totally fell apart. Obviously he's playing in Ottawa. He would love to see Toronto implode. I think there's all sorts of rationales behind why he might be offering that up for media consumption.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And we'll transition into talking about Coach Dinwiddie, and he brought up Coach Dinwiddie. A lot of fans, I've seen so much on social media this week that I just don't get. I know there's frustration. I think Toronto, we've been spoiled for the last few years in that Toronto won the East each of the last 3 seasons. They finished first in the East last year so early that it wasn't even the end of summer, and they had clinched the East basically ahead of what Montreal's schedule. You think Montreal's playing well right now and they're running away with things. Toronto was ahead of that pace last year. By 3 days from now, I guess they had already clinched the East, and so we've been very spoiled. We've been very lucky. It's been a tough season this year. They were out without their starting quarterback for the first 9 games. Their starting quarterback returns, and they're 1-2 in that stretch, playing kind of disjointed football, like some really good football and some really bad football, getting off to terrible starts in all 3 of those games. And so it is frustrating as a fan. But the idea of pointing at Coach Dinwiddie for this is seriously flawed. And I want to detail some of the reasons why. So I'm going to start with the numbers, because those alone, I think, are probably enough just to say, like, let this go. Let this ride and see. But I've got more to add to that after. But numbers wise, he's 42-20. Record wise, he's a win away from being the 5th all-time winningest coach in Argos history. If he coaches next season, he will almost certainly be number 3 all-time in wins as an Argos coach. And he's only been coaching here. And don't forget, his first season, 2021, was a shortened season. It was only a 10-game season. So the fact that he's putting up these kind of numbers in what is essentially 3 full years of football right now is enough just on its own. And he won a Grey Cup. Let's not forget 3 East titles, a Grey Cup. That's not bad. And then we add to that the fact that he's been playing with a very short hand this season. Like, this is, yes, they've struggled more this year than years past. They haven't been at 500 this late in the season before under Coach Dinwiddie, but they are at 500. And they spent the first half of the season without a starting quarterback. They've had the most man games lost to injury of any CFL team. That's not even including Chad Kelly. So, because that was the suspension. So Chad Kelly isn't even in the picture there, and they still lost the most man games of anyone else. You think about Wyndham McManus and Jared Brinkman. Darius Sirocco still hasn't stepped on the field yet. The starting center, you've got all-star after all-star that, like, forget about the ones that he lost that have gone to other teams. These are the ones that are still on the roster and haven't been able to play, or have been able to play limited games. And he's still been able to keep them competitive and in the mix. And then the last thing I'll say on that, before I know I'm hogging the mic here, I'll let you jump in, JB. But the last thing I want to say about that is you see it in the play of the players and the fact that they don't quit. You haven't seen quit from the Argos. It would have been really easy to roll over down 31-3 at halftime. When the coaches lost the room, that 31-3 becomes 57-3. We've seen that before. Actually, in BC in 2019, we've seen stuff like that. That is not what happened. They fought their way back. They knew how important point differential might become, and they got that to within a 14-point game at the end. Guys were fighting, and veterans were fighting. Rookies were fighting. Guys like Damante Coxey was fighting and diving for footballs and putting his body in harm's way. And Mackay Polk, first-year player, doing the same thing. Like, guys are out there for their coach. And so this notion to me that you have to move on from Coach Dinwiddie it's just wrong. And so I'm telling you, wait it out. He has earned that, if nothing else, from his record alone. But there's so much on top of that that tells you got to give this guy a chance.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a knee-jerk reaction. I think that, if you look at Hamilton, like, that's not a very well-coached team, and you might look at that and say, like, the things need to change here because there's a discrepancy between the talent on the roster and the results, and that's a fair conversation. But if you look at Toronto and its record over the last 2 years, and the fact that it's only 6-6 right now, it's not 1-9. This has been a very challenging season. They could have easily have gone 1-2-7 to start the season, without a starting quarterback. They basically mirrored and smoked, and taped it together for half of the season, and now they're going through some rough patches because it's really hard to integrate, a quarterback into your roster halfway through the season, and they have some significant injuries. There's nothing about watching this team. I think we would both be all over if we felt that this team was being poorly coached or poorly, the game plans didn't make any sense. I mean, there's things that we quibble with sometimes, but he's clearly a very good coach. So I don't, like, sometimes you just don't have the horses to get it done. And, sometimes the injuries are a lot. They've lost. If you look at the roster right now versus the roster of this time last year, it's pretty stark. How different it is. So I think that there's stuff to clean up for sure. They have to find a way to kind of get into a successful Chad Kelly offense. I don't think they quite know what that looks like yet. And we need to get Winton McManus back for the defense. And, that's going to make a huge difference. And I think once you put those two things together, this is still, we can get into the power rankings, but I mean, I can assure you that there is nobody who wants any part of this team in the playoffs.
And just to reinforce what we were saying about man games lost, like, this is pretty much the healthiest Toronto has been at this moment in terms of guys on the 6-game. They've got 11 guys on the 6-game injured list, and that's as good as it's been basically since like week 2. So the guys that we even forget about, like when's the last time someone asked about Dejan Brissett, for example, who's been on the 6-game injured list? Everyone, I think, kind of forgot a little bit about Darius Sirocco, another guy too. And then just to have, when guys come back, suddenly Woody Barron's on the 6-game injured list. And so it keeps going. And yeah, he's managed to fight his way through that. And the last thing I'll say about it too is I do think he's actually a good coach, like his X's and O's. I don't think it's perfect. I think he's made some mistakes. He knows that, though. He always recognizes that post-game. When we talk to him post-game, he's the first one to say that, maybe I gave up on the run game too soon, or there were some things I wanted to do that we didn't get to. Stuff we criticize him about. It's not like he disagrees with us on that or didn't see it in advance. It's that circumstances dictated that something else happened, and it's tough. It's tough sometimes when you, in the flow of the game, you sometimes get away from your plan. But that's really the only thing I've been hard on him for this year, is not having more rushes in the game in Calgary and then last week in Ottawa. They needed to run the ball more and they didn't. And aside from that, I really don't have too much negative to say. I think he's done a great job coaching this team. And you look around the league, Not every team is happy with their coaching staff and how things are going there. There are going to be changes again this offseason. Without a doubt, Toronto should not be one of those teams to make any kind of change. Even thinking about it is absurd, frankly.
I mean, it's fine. There are things that need to get cleaned up, of course. Those need to get cleaned up. And look, at the end of the season, you can, not make a change, but you can certainly look at the latter half of the season and evaluate how successful the team was at fixing its flaws and have that as a conversation moving forward. But certainly you're not looking to make any coaching changes, I don't think, with this team. That hasn't been the issue.
The power rankings this week have upset some people, JB, and it's understandable. The CFL power rankings came out, and they have Toronto 8th, ahead of only Calgary in 9th. That was the one that got people upset. I think Three Down Nation's power rankings, I don't think upset Argos fans. I think they kind of expected that. They have them in 6th. I think 6th is fair for how the Argos have lost 2 in a row to Hamilton, to Ottawa. I think that's probably about where I would put them in a power rankings. I think anything else, you're projecting a lot. And 8th, though, seems a little harsh.
Oh, I mean, look, that's preposterous. I mean, I know what happened, but I don't care. Like, I would, Toronto's a better team than Hamilton. Toronto's a better team than Ottawa. Toronto's a better team than Edmonton. Toronto's a better team than Calgary. Toronto is probably pretty close to Saskatchewan, and that's where Toronto belongs, whether you're firing on all cylinders or not. But when it comes right down to the playoffs, we'll see. I mean, we'll see what happens, but I certainly am not trembling at the thought of Toronto having to go to Ottawa. I know it sounds ridiculous what just happened, but if you look at that game, that was not one team beating another. That was one team, that was one team where I know somehow they're able to do it, but I think that they can adjust the things that caused that Ottawa game to go sideways. And if they're healthy, I think Toronto can dominate. So, I think probably more like 5 is reasonable, but I understand everybody wants to pile on Toronto.
It's fun to pile on Toronto. We know that's a CFL theme, and honestly, maybe. I embrace that. Like, I think that's the way you have to look at this, because from a coaching perspective, I tell you, like, I promise you, Coach Dinwiddie would much rather be ranked 8th in the power rankings than 1st. He hated when the Argos were ranked 1st overall. I remember talking to him after a game in Calgary where they had lost after being ranked number 1, and he's like, good, hopefully we'll come down and be ranked 2. And then they weren't. They were still number 1 the following week, and I didn't get to ask him about that. But yeah, no coach wants to be ranked 1. It's the worst to be ranked at the top. And being ranked 8th, it doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with the standings. It has nothing to do with win-loss. All it does is get you fired up and get you angry as a team. And I've told stories before about this, but like I've coached teams that were ranked very highly nationally, and we got our doors blown off. And that same team, when we completely fall off the rankings and aren't even being talked about, would go on and win. And actually, that example, I think we were 5th in the country one year, lost our opener 36-0, dropped right off the rankings, as we should have, and came back and ended up not only winning our league but winning provincials as well. And that shows you the sort of mental side of rankings. It does actually play a role in there, because you've got a target on your back, and sometimes you think you're better than you are as well when you're ranked near the top. So I love the Argos being ranked either 6th or 8th. Bring it on. I think that's only a good thing. And Argos fans, you can't be upset about that. You want to see stuff like that. What are the realistic expectations for the Argos for the end of this season, JB? You got the games remaining. I'll detail them for you here. So it's at BC this week, home to Hamilton, home to Montreal, at Winnipeg, home to Ottawa, at Edmonton. That's how the season ends. You've got a 6-game stretch to end the season. I know people are panicking and say, well, what if we don't make the playoffs? And so you'd have to basically lose out for that to happen. And if the Argos can even just get 2 wins on those last 6, it basically guarantees a playoff spot. Not mathematically, but for all intents and purposes. And I don't think that's the goal. I think the goal is still to try and catch Ottawa, and I still think that's doable. So when you look at these last 6 games, like how do you see that? What are the expectations? So what are the playoff expectations? How do you see this team competing going forward?
I would expect the expectations would be to go 4-2. I think that if the team is going to be a force in the playoffs, and we're going to have to go on the road, probably going to have to go into Montreal to win the Eastern Conference
For sure.
They're going to need to show that they have that gear. I mean, I think 4-2 is very reasonable to be looking at. I mean, even if they go on a short week to BC and get the doors blown off them on Friday. I don't know if that will happen or not, but even if it did, it's still fine. I mean, you simply, regroup and, come back together and, get back to what you feel you can do well, and hopefully you can get back some healthy people. But there's just too much talent on this team to not think that they can go 4-2. That's a very reasonable end of schedule. Like this is the hardest part of the schedule, and it is, it's not surprising that they're having a rough time. They're a good team. They're not a great team. Last year's team was a great team. This is a good team with flaws, and so therefore they're exactly like Saskatchewan. Another good team with flaws. It just they're having a hard time grinding out wins because they have some flaws, but I think their top gear is still better than Ottawa's.
I don't know if anyone likes the Saskatchewan comparison, given that they haven't won a post Labor Day game in 3 years. I don't think that's encouraging, but I get what you're saying. Like that's Saskatchewan. You look at their team on paper, like that's a much better team than their record. They've had some brutal losses where you're like, how did they find a way to lose that game or tie that game in Ottawa, for example? They could have a very different record. They've had some bad luck, but I think Toronto's a better team than that Saskatchewan team, honestly.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I haven't felt like Toronto has played a team that was significantly better than they were. I thought except for the first Montreal game.
Yeah.
But other than that first Montreal game, and then obviously they showed that when they played again, but that they haven't played a team that's bigger, stronger, faster. I haven't found. I just found like they have some stuff to clean up. They're not a juggernaut. They don't have that margin of error that they did last year. They can't have the turnovers. They can't have the fumbles. They need the defense to turn the ball over more. These are aspects that they need to have to win. It is harder to win this year than it was last year because for a variety of reasons. For one, I think they have. I don't think the roster is as good as last year's was, and not having Chet Kelly for most of the season is making it a little hard for them to find a way. It's like they've got this engine in my Formula One analogy. Like they've got this engine in from Renault, and they've dropped it in, but they just haven't quite figured out how to make it work yet. So I hope they do. I think if they can, then they can really get back to winning games. But they haven't quite figured out what a Toronto Argo Chad Kelly offense looks like yet.
The funny thing to me about this team and what I see them as going forward is honestly, it's almost anybody's league this year. There's so many teams that are within, I guess, the top to bottom. Like aside from, I do think Calgary's in a rough spot. I think Hamilton's in a rough spot. I think you take those two teams out, and the way that Edmonton's playing right now, I do think anyone can play with anyone, and no win on any given day in any stadium would really surprise me. Like Toronto has struggled a lot more with Hamilton than they have with Montreal. They played both teams twice. They crushed Montreal in Montreal. They lost by 10 to Montreal in Toronto. Hamilton's got out to a 21-3 start, and what was the other one? 18-3 start in the first one. And Hamilton is not a very good football team, but it just shows you this league is so wide open this year that it actually reminds that this Toronto team it reminds me of some of those Grey Cup Toronto teams that were 10-8, and no one was really talking about finishing second or third in the division, and they just go on a run, they get hot at the right time. And I think that this team's actually got more talent than some of those teams that went on those runs. Let's not forget that at 6-6, this is exactly where the Montreal Alouettes were last year. They were 6-6. They were actually 6-7. They went on to lose during this week of the season to the Argos, actually, to go 6-7, and then they went on their run after that. And it's not like everyone else was struggling. They had Toronto way out in front of the division. They were talking about not making the playoffs. They were talking about it being rough in rebuilding and changes that needed to be made, and they went on this run. And I think that this Argos team, you look up and down that roster, has at least as much, if not more talent than that team that went on that run. And so I'm not putting anything past them. I just don't think there's no game where they felt really outmatched this year, except I will give you that Montreal loss at BMO. Montreal just played a really clean game. Even though they only won by 10, it was never really in question. They were a professional football squad that showed up that day. But every other game, every other team, it's been essentially a coin flip. Aside from the blowout in Ottawa last week, it was a perfect storm of just everything going wrong.
I mean, they have to stop turning the ball over.
Yeah,
well, and that
yes, especially early.
I mean, you look at their statistics are very good in every category, but sacks and turnovers, and those are the two areas. They have to give up less sacks, and they have to stop turning the ball over. And it sounds simplistic, but I mean that's literally why they're losing these games. Like, the games they have lost have been extreme turnover, sack-filled disaster shows where they're still in the game, but it's like statistically, like, how are you possibly in this game? They just have to clean that up, and I believe they can. I think if they can get back healthy, they can play with anybody. I think BC is definitely dangerous. They're on the ascension, and Rourke is healthy and feeling his, and he's playing like an MVP, and that's the one wild card. I think that's it's gonna be really interesting to watch what Toronto's able to do here, but that's okay. They don't need to be one of the top two teams. They just need to get in the playoffs. I think that's the focus right now, is to get this team in the playoffs. This is not a coronation year. This is a fight down in the trench type of year. And to be honest, I'm kind of excited. Coronation year was fun, but not nearly as enjoyable as a team that has some issues and is able to kind of battle its way. I think as a fan, that's more interesting if you can shock the league as opposed to crush the league.
Transactions were pretty light this week. Former Argonaut Leonard Johnson, who got a few starts at corner for the Argos, has signed in Hamilton because, of course, he did. And I'm getting it. I totally understand. I talked about this before, but I understand how Calgary felt a few years ago. I kind of dismissed it at the time when all these Argos were signing from Calgary. I didn't see what their problem was. I'm like, well, then why didn't you sign all these guys? If you wanted them so much, why didn't you just keep them there? And the thing is, of course, it's impossible to do that. But even guys like, it's not like they couldn't have kept Leonard Johnson. They wanted to take a look at other guys, but it just seems like anybody that Toronto lets go gets picked up by usually Hamilton, or if it's not Hamilton, it's Edmonton. There's so many Argonauts on those two teams, or former Argonauts on those two teams. So he's on the practice roster. I don't know if he's going to get playing time or not. I actually think he fits into that system fairly well. I actually think he should. I would actually elevate him pretty quickly as soon as he learns that system. I don't like most of Hamilton's secondary right now, and I think that they can make some changes. And I think Leonard Johnson getting added to that starting lineup probably is a plus for them with the system that they're running there. So we'll see what happens with him. But yeah, on a personal level, you always like to cheer for a guy like Leonard Johnson. But on a team level, obviously, fans listening to this podcast are hoping that he's not a guy that comes back to burn the Argos in a couple of weeks' time. Let's do pick six, JB. Question kind of directed at you this week. So our question for pick six is from Laura G. And before I read the question, I want to tell you about the sponsorship that we've got for this segment from Something in the Water Brewing. You win a 6-pack of delicious Something in the Water Brewing beer for us reading your question and answering your question on this podcast. We do it every week. And so when you see us on social media, put out the call to say, hey, give us your questions. Everyone can submit a question. And if you are the question that we read that week, you win a 6-pack of beer. So Laura G has won a 6-pack of beer from Something in the Water Brewing. This is the question, JB, and I'll let you answer first.
Okay.
In the Ottawa postgame podcast, JB said it looked like Kelly is trying too hard for the big play. Not having much team football experience, isn't that more a coaching decision with the play calling?
I would say on the whole, no. It is kind of compliment in that one of the defining characteristics of a quarterback who can be a starter or even a star is that they always keep their eyes downfield, that even as the rush is coming or if they're moving up in the pocket, that their eyes are always scanning their receivers, looking for the deeper routes to throw the ball to, not immediately looking for the check down. While that can be smart football and there's a time and place for that, usually quarterbacks who do that are not able to be successful because they just are, they become check down kings. And it's really, really hard to break that habit and to learn to study. So I think what makes Chad great is that, on almost every scheme, you have options, you have near options, and you have deep options. So I don't think that the schemes don't have, check down options for Chad. It's just that he needs to pick those options, I think, a little more often because depending on the defense, if they're playing a shell defense or they have a lot of guys deep, those are low percentage throws. And so while it's terrific that he's looking for them, and that's what makes him so dangerous, I do think there are throws he makes that are ill-advised. And, sometimes they come back to haunt them. Sometimes they turn into pick sixes. Sometimes they don't. But for sure in the games he's played this year, the coaches are not telling him to throw deep. Obviously, they have no communication with him. He's looking for the deep options in the play. The coach is kind of beholden to what he chooses to do. I think he needs to look for the closer option more. So I guess in that way, the coaches really can't do much once the play starts. It's a little different than defense, right? Once the play starts, it's really up to the quarterback as to who he's going to choose from his usually 5 receivers.
And I think like Coach Dinwiddie likes that Chad has that freedom and that decision. Like he's talked about how Chad right from the beginning last year had full field reads. He wasn't being restricted. A lot of new quarterbacks, and Chad was a new quarterback last year, coming in, a lot of new quarterbacks, you're giving them a couple options. It's going to be half field that we're looking at, or maybe sometimes it's even as simplified as if the corner does this, you're here. If the corner does this, you're here. Usually not at the pro level, but sometimes, especially new guys coming in. And that was never the case with Chad. He liked that Chad had full field authority and could make the call, and he wasn't. Coach Dinwiddie's not saying this on this play you throw to Tavares, on this play, other than quick receiver screens and stuff like that. But aside from those, he has liberty. It's just, and you're saying you would like to see him not necessarily go for the home run as often as he is. And personally, I don't mind it too much. I think he, I agree with what you're saying, JB. I think I would probably be a little bit more reluctant to come out and say don't throw deep as much, because I actually really like that part of his game. I think he's really good at it, and I love being on the attack, and I love that you have to keep those guys back. What the change I would make is I just think you have to run more to complement that, and you take advantage of the fact that you've got DBs on their heels, you've got everyone backing up. They have to. If they don't, Kelly's going to burn you with the deep ball, and so now you have to, from a play calling standpoint, you got to punish through the run game. But yeah, on every play, it's rare to have plays, like back to Laura's question, it's rare to have plays where you've got everybody running short, unless you've got goal line concepts and stuff like that. Mostly there's a couple guys that are deep, and you really try to spread that out and force defenders to create space, to space out in their zones, and that's where you find the holes and stuff like that.
Now, I think you could argue that the offense does need to evolve and become a little less deep dagger dependent. I would love to see the offense.
Well, they can't be your strategy.
They can't be your primary strategy at the 40-yard pass. I would love to see it become a little more varied, and use short and use mid range and use deep, and the style of pass and the type of pass. I think I mean, watching it doesn't feel like there's a variety. Like it feels like there's run, and then there's a 40-yard pass, and then there's run, and then there's a 40-yard pass, and sometimes that works, and sometimes it gets intercepted. That's a little bit how it feels lately.
I think you have to put the receiver screens in there too. Like Coach Dinwiddie loves the receiver screens. That's a really big part of his philosophy, because that's like, to me, that's like, he views that, I think, as an extension of the run game. That's basically his outside run, is those quick receiver screens where you're looking for guys. If they don't break them, you're still looking for the 5, 6, 7 yards like you'd be looking and hoping for on a run play. I like to see them execute those better. Like, I just felt like the blocking has been there as much. And I think you do have better execution in the run. So I kind of think the run pairs better with that. Whereas I like the combination of the run, the occasional receiver screen, and then those deeper concepts on the outside. But I also think what I want to see a little bit more of, but they're in the plays, they're in his designs. Like he does have a lot of deep digs, like behind the linebacker digs. He has posts and digs coming in behind the backers. But if the linebackers aren't respecting the run, then they're fanning out and taking those away really quickly. And that's where I think, and that goes into my OCDC this week, actually, as a bit of a spoiler. But I think if you can pull those linebackers in a little bit, the stuff he's calling, there's a lot of potential downfield. I just think it needs a little bit more traditional run to complement it. But I don't have a problem with his philosophy offensively or his play designs at all. Let's get into the game preview, JB, and I'm going to try and dispel some myths, some assumptions, and I'm just as much to blame as anyone else, because the last 2 times I went to BC Place, horrible things happened. The Argos lost 55-8 in 2019, and then when I went in 2022, they lost 44-3. And by the way, the 55-8 game was actually 55-0 at one point. And it actually felt much worse than that 44-3 game. That was also horrible. And so I think those 2 games are why we have this shudder as people around the Argos, as Argos fans, as maybe, I don't think it extends to the players. These guys weren't there for most of that. But fans certainly do not like the idea of going to BC Place, because those losses were brutal and they stick out in your mind as just being horrible, horrible moments as an Argos fan. What I want to say is that those 2 are pretty isolated. It doesn't really extend beyond that. The Argos, in truth, over the last 6 meetings, home and away, are pretty good against BC. At home, they've dominated the Lions. In the last 6 meetings, the Argos are 5-1. They've won 4 straight at BMO Field. But at BC Place, yes, they got blown out in the last 2, and they have lost 3 in a row. But that third loss in a row was a 26-23 loss. It was tight, and they won the previous 3 meetings before that at BC Place. So they're actually 3-3 in their last 6 at BC Place, and they're 5-1 at BMO Field against the Lions. So the idea that they just can't go, it's not the same as Calgary, because Calgary does seem cursed. Like Calgary, they've got 1 win since 2009 or something absurd like that. That's a problem. That building, for whatever reason, is an issue. BC Place, there's been 2 bad wins in a row, but remember, they've only played twice there since 2019. So it's not like this staff, like Coach Dinwiddie, has only been to BC Place once. It went very poorly, but he's only been there 1 time. So he's 0-1 at BC Place. Chad Kelly's never started at BC Place. He came into that game late when it was 44-0 or something like that. And he came in for 1 drive. He got sacked really hard, as I recall. But this is not a record that sits on this current team. These guys on this Argos team have no memory of playing and losing and struggling in BC Place. So I think that's the game preview for me, is we got to throw that stuff away. And I'm as guilty as anyone. We got to throw that part away. BC Place isn't an issue. This team starts fresh this week going into BC. That doesn't mean it's easy to travel across the country. It's not, but every team has to do it in every league, and they find a way. And so Toronto has to find a way this week at BC Place. Let's take a look at the injury report for this week. It really interesting on the BC side. Let's start there first. There's two guys that I have my eye on for the BC practices this week. And I guess really it's just tomorrow, and then we'll hear their game status. So one is Gary Peters. Gary Peters went down with an ankle injury against Montreal this past week. Gary Peters is one of, if not the best cover corner in the CFL. He's a problem. He can take guys away. And him being out really changes things. Now, him be playing and not being 100% still, I think, gives you opportunities. He's going to be lined up over DeMonte Coxey if he plays, and I think that there are opportunities there even if he plays and he's not 100%. So I'll talk about that more in OCDC, but that's one guy I'm watching. The other guy is probably Chris Schlugger. They've had some issues on the offensive line, especially at left tackle. Like Neville was struggling there last week against Montreal. It's not like he really shouldn't be out there at left tackle. They didn't really have an answer after Broxton went down. And so Schlugger's been injured for, I think, 6 or 7 weeks now. He's eligible to come off the 6-game injury list. He can come off right away without any punishment, salary cap wise. And he was able to practice full today. So that tells me they're looking to get him back. And he's a tackle, and he's a guy that can do, I think, a better job than what we saw from Neville last week. So he's a guy I continue to watch. But I think those two guys are going to be the biggest difference makers in terms of guys that are on the injury report. Santi Evans showed up on the injury report too. He practiced full. I expect him to start at corner like he did last week. On the Argo side, some good news. So the biggest good news, I think Jared Brinkman is going to play this week. He is due to come off the 6-game injured list. I believe this is probably his target from the moment he got hurt. And he was able to practice full today. So hopefully he's on track with that ankle injury, feels good enough with it that he can make that trip to BC and start for the Argos. And that is such a difference maker because he can almost single-handedly eliminate the run game and have the linebackers not having to worry about filling gaps the same way that they might otherwise, and they can start fanning back into coverage and make it more difficult on Nathan Rourke. So that's the big piece of good news. Dejan Brissett, I mentioned earlier, with that knee injury, practice full. That's a really exciting development as well because he does change the game and is something of a ratio breaker with that speed that he provides on the field side. So another piece of good news. Devaris Daniels was banged up with the groin injury, missed last week's game. He practiced full. That's good news. Teodric Hansen practiced full. He's been out for a while. That's great news with that hip injury that he's recovering from. Ryan Hunter has stepped away for personal reasons. He practiced full, was back at practice today. So all good news. The one guy I've been asked a lot about is Wynton McManus. I think at least one more week. He's due to come off the 6-game next week. He practiced in limited fashion today. I don't know if he's on target to return next week. I think that's the hope, but he is one of the biggest difference makers on this defense, if not the biggest difference maker, and he would certainly be welcome back. The difference on this team with Brinkman and McManus is massive. So that's our injury report for this week. I think for the first time in a while, things are starting to look positive for the Toronto Argonauts. It's time for OCDC. JB, you started off first. I don't think you've said a word in about 5 minutes. I've been rambling. You got to take this first segment here. For OCDC, we'll start with the BC Lions. What is your defensive plan for the BC Lions in stopping Kadeem Carey, Chad Kelly, and company?
Well, I wish. I don't think the book on the Argos has changed. I think that Chad is shown a propensity to throw passes he shouldn't. I think that if you give him downfield looks, he will try and take them. You can bait him into throws. He gets impatient. I mean, that's certainly the way it looks to me. I would say as a defensive coordinator, Toronto's run game seems to come in spurts, but it doesn't seem to be anything that can substitute for the passing game. So it doesn't really scare me at all. I'm not concerned about the run game at all. I don't think it's been as useful in the red zone as you might hope. So like if they want to run between the 20s, that's fine by me. I think that you're still playing a lot of deep shell stuff. And daring Toronto to have a 12 play drive. And until the book changes, I think that's what you're looking to do. I think that you are, offering, occasionally offering up um, some deep routes when it's a pass situation. You can get to him. The line has shown some weakness at not being able to hold up in pass specific situations, especially in like 2 minute drills. Um, the line collapses and then the whole thing kind of comes tumbling down. So I think that you pick your spots in terms of pass rush, but yeah, when you're in, basically when they're in a 2 minute drive, I would just blitz every down. It seems to be pretty successful in terms of collapsing that pocket and Chad not necessarily going immediately to a hot route or immediately to a dump off play. That he's looking to move the ball downfield and then getting sacked, unfortunately. So, but that's the book on him, and I will continue to do that.
For the BC offense, I think if Brinkman's starting, I've said this a few times this year, I know they've got William Stanback, and I think he looked great against Montreal last week. I don't think this is the same situation. I think I do. It's not like I don't run at all. I think you have to. I think he's one of your guys. You still are going to try and keep Toronto honest. But I think you have to depend on the run a little less as BC, because I think Toronto's going to be able to take that away. Kind of similar to what we saw in the first meeting between these two teams. I really think you want to hit screens. That's the first one. I think you want to try and running back screens. I love. I think that the Toronto front four, for sure, if not adding linebackers, are going to want to get after Rourke, because I think they see vulnerability on the BC offensive line. This offensive line is so banged up. They've got so many pieces that weren't the initial plan for the BC Lions. And I think this defensive front four, like Flo Romolati's got to be looking at that film from last week thinking, I can't wait to play these Lions. And Serezna, who's maybe had a couple quiet games, I'm sure he wants to get back out there too, not to mention Brinkman and Robbie Smith. And so I want to try and take advantage of that aggression. And so that's why I'm hitting screens. That's why I'm trying to lure them in and then dump that ball over top. So I think that's a big part of the game. Quick passes behind the backers off play action too. See if you can get them to bite. See if you can bring the backers up on play action to stand back, because they're going to be seeing that film from last week against Montreal where they did run, where he was a difference maker. And so if you can just creep those backers in a little bit and hit those dig routes in behind them, hit the over routes in behind them, those are tough to cover. Those are tough to recover from too. As a backer, when you're taking those hard steps forward, to suddenly bail out and turn to plan B is tough. And it's also, it helps in the slowing down the pass rush too, because as a defensive lineman, if you think it's going to be a run play, you're not attacking the gap the same way that you are when you know it's a pass play. So I think that helps BC in a couple ways. So that is my plan. And then Nathan Rourke is your quarterback. I still think you can take some deep shots. I think that you want to really spread the field around. At the end of the day, Nathan Rourke's sort of spray chart should be very even across the field. And I think that's what I'm aiming for if I'm the BC coordinator. Let's flip to the good guys. JB, what is your defensive plan for the Toronto Argonauts?
Well, Rourke is a bit of the other side of the coin of Kelly. I think that, or I don't know, maybe they're the same side of the coin. Rourke is back and he is keen to put his stamp on the league. He is keen to move that ball down the field. He is prone to interception. He's gotten a little better in the last couple of days, but he's a dangerous quarterback. There's no two ways about it. He would have been the league MVP had he not gotten hurt. He seems to be building to get to league MVP pace right now. He's probably the only quarterback in the league that I'm scared of as a defensive coordinator in terms of like circling. They have to get pressure. BC is the only team worse. I know there's a couple of big games add up, but they're the only team worse than Toronto for giving up sacks. You absolutely have to get pressure on Rourke, from time to time. I would play a lot of man coverage against him. I think he's really smart. If you have busts, they're going to see. Certainly, like Toronto's had some busts in the last couple of games on deep overs or over, like a shallow deep choice and the safety coming down. I think you're going to play more man than maybe you want to. I think you mix in a bit of zone, but I think when you play an elite quarterback, you have to be able to play man, because they'll just take you apart. You just can't, like, zone like largely works for quarterbacks who aren't as good. They can't read it, they don't see it, they make a mistake. So it's really important to I think to show BC a lot of man coverage. Maybe some man too. The BC wants to throw it deep. They love the deep play, but I think that's going to be an interesting matchup. I'd love to see how much man they play. I would certainly play a lot of man, and Stanback again. He's good. He's going to run for 100 yards. Doesn't seem to have any impact on whether they win or lose. He runs for 100 yards and they lose, and he runs for 125 and they win. I think it's, I don't think it's crucial. I think it's more crucial that you're able to not let Rourke get into any kind of rhythm and start feeling things, and he'll turn the ball over. Like, there are turnovers to be had there. He, much like Chad, he is a star, and stars want to push the ball down the field, even maybe when they shouldn't. So I would be looking to try and get more picks.
And he had some bad luck like Chad did last week. And I was kind of going back through that BC game and starting to prep for this show. He had some bad luck. He still was like 22 of 28 or something like that, but he had 3 picks. 2 of those picks went off his receiver's hands. Like, one seemed to hit like McGinnis in the shoulder pads and bounced right to a Montreal DB. Another one hit William Stanback in the hands and bounced right to Dequoy. But they're coming in at like 500 miles an hour, and I think there was just still an adjustment. I know he's been back for 4 games, but I just think the receivers may have not quite been ready for that pace, and those tip balls end up in picks. And that's basically what happened to Chad Kelly in Ottawa, not because of the pace necessarily. Well, maybe the Mackay Polk one, but yeah, he had a couple of bounces. But I do think, like you're saying, I think Rourke played a good game against Montreal. You look at that picks number, that's not really a real stat this week. He had a good game, but I would also say that Chad Kelly, I think, has played just as well in his first 3 as Rourke did in his first 3. I think actually Chad's played better in his first 3. Rourke's now played 4 games, and his 4th game I thought was maybe his 3rd was the best game, but his 4th, like 3rd and 4th, he's kind of back now, and I think Argos fans are hoping Chad gets there this week.
From a defensive point of view, look, the reality is he's an elite quarterback. You're going to have to put up 30 to beat him. You're not going to get him to throw 175 yards and 3 picks. I mean, I wish. He's going to put up yards. He's going to score touchdowns. So I know it sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but, I think the onus is really on the offense. If the offense can't put up 30, I think the defense will work to keep BC in the 20s, and that will be success if they're able to do that.
I think you're going to love my prediction for a bit later on based on what you just said. Let's wrap up OCDC with the Toronto offense. My plan, run and run again. You're not only running, but you are going to start by running the football. I think BC's vulnerable there. I know that they have had some games where they're able to stop the run. When I look at that personnel up and down the defensive line, I look at their linebackers and watch how they're playing. I just think Toronto has a huge advantage here in the run game, and they have to exploit that. And so my plan this week, I want to go heavy. I want to send Giffen in there as he comes in as the guard and bounce Ryan Hunter out to the tight tight end spot. I want to go heavy. I want to declare that we're running, and I want to run right up the middle. And I think that is going to help set up the other stuff. I think that is going to set up the mid-level stuff. I think it's going to help set up the deeper stuff, because I feel like to stop the run, they're going to have to bring guys down into the box. They're going to have to play a lot more aggressive. Certainly there's Sam. I think is going to have to come into the box. I think they're going to have to walk the safety down a little tighter as well. Make this a Kadeem Carey game. Make this a toughness game, an attitude game, and run with that the whole week with the offensive line. Like, this is you this week. You are better than them. Show me on Friday. And so that's going to be my strategy. Now, the other stuff too, Peters isn't playing, then yeah, you try and test him over the top. Whoever's there, I don't care who it is. And even if Peters is playing, I think then you're going with double moves. You're trying even like diamond releases and stuff just to get his ankles moving and test them, because he's probably not going to be 100% if he does play. What is your one thing this week, JB?
Well, I would like to see the Toronto offense score more than 30 points.
That is a theme for you, and I think that does it. I do. I think you get to 30. I think you win the game. Look, there's going to be a shootout. I mean, there's no two ways about it. It's in BC plays. I mean, this is kind of the game that I'm sure Chad Kelly is excited about, because here we go. Like, this is not going to be a Hamilton rock fight or an Ottawa rock fight. This, although that Ottawa game score looked preposterous, I think this is going to be who scores last. And there's no wind and there's no rain. There is no weather. It is pristine conditions inside the dome. It's time to go off and put up some points. I'm going to go on the other side of the ball for my one thing. 4 sacks. I want 4 sacks this week. BC's O-line they were already, like, Toronto they have 6 sacks in the first meeting, I feel like, and the O-line has had injury troubles since then. There is no reason why Toronto can't be all over that backfield and forcing Nathan Rourke to get rid of that ball. 4 sacks, I think, gets the job done. I think keeps the BC Lions away from scoring more points than the Argos are going to score. So that's my one thing. I want to see 4 sacks. What's the prediction, JB? How does this one end in BC?
Well, I see 2 paths ahead. I'm going to go with the optimistic in that I believe in the coaching staff, and I believe that they're going to stem this, as they've shown an ability to stem losing streaks before. I think Chad Kelly is ready for this matchup with Rourke. I mean, these are the 2 star quarterbacks. I think that's the kind of thing he loves. I like Toronto, and I like Toronto 36-32.
For me, this is it's a win. It's a losing streak that's 2 games, and Coach Dinwiddie doesn't have 3-game losing streaks. It's just not part of. I just don't think he's going to let it happen, and I don't think Chad Kelly is going to let it happen either. I don't think the defensive leaders on this team are going to let this happen. Even the guys not playing, like, I don't think Wyndham McManus is going to let that happen. I wouldn't be surprised to see him make the trip and be out there on the sideline getting his guys fired up, because there are so many guys on this team that just this isn't part of what they do on the football field. They haven't experienced this over the last few years, and they're going to find a way to get this done. I think it's going to be a really tough game, and I think it is going to come down to the wire. I think at the end, Toronto is going to have just enough. I think what helps them a little bit, BC is coming off a huge emotional win in Montreal. That was big for them. And they're coming back home now. Not that we're going to see a letdown, but I think they gave Montreal everything. They were firing last week, and it's hard to fire the same way 2 weeks in a row. And I think the Argos, coming off one of their most dreadful performances in back-to-back weeks, and they're looking at that film all week, that's just not who they are as a team. And so I expect them to have a really strong week this week. At the end of the day, Argos 31, BC 29. Maybe it's the last-second field goal make, maybe it's the last-second field goal miss, but the Argos win by 2. It's time for Put Me Down for 20. JB, we struggled last week. We were 0-4 collectively. We've had a couple of those. We're actually on a terrible slide. over the last like month and a half. And so my disclaimer to you is more relevant today than perhaps ever. Do not bet any of your hard-earned money on our game that we're playing here with our fictional golden fleeces. Only ever bet what you are happy to lose as the cost of entertainment. JB, I'm at 187 golden fleeces from my 0.5 from my original 200. You are at 167.7 golden fleeces.
All right. Well, let me hear what you got.
All right. So my picks for this week, I'm going with money line picks because I was looking up and down the props list. I don't like the payouts, especially you compare them to player props in NFL games. Like, I feel like some of the betting sites have sort of given up on the CFL for player payouts because you're getting things like even money on touchdowns for guys that don't score a lot of touchdowns, and other bets are similar like that. So for me, it's money line bets. My Argos bet is Argos straight up. Plus 184.
I exactly. I love it. I love the juice.
It's a great price. So that was an automatic to me. 184. Like, how can you turn that down? And then the other one, this is a bit riskier to me. I like the Tiger Cats money line payout. It's plus 168. They're playing Ottawa. Ottawa is on super high right now, and they are primed for a fall. And we've seen this happen before. Lots of teams from East and West where they're riding high. They're like, oh, yeah, Hamilton, yeah, no problem. And they come in there, and there's a bit of a disaster. So I think the Tiger Cats might pull this off this week. And even if they don't, that juice is worth the gamble. So 10 golden fleeces on each of those. Where are you going with your hard-earned golden fleeces this week, JB?
You know what? I'm gonna go with DeMonte Coxey scoring a touchdown plus 125. I think that he's got a really nice connection with Kelly. He's played fantastic this season, especially last couple of games. I like him. I like him to score a touchdown. So I think that's decent juice for a guy who I think Kelly's going to look for in the end zone, because I think that he's shown somebody who will go, he will go fight for that ball. I think he's probably Kelly's favorite receiver.
Yeah, he likes Neal a lot too. That was the guy that stood out. But yeah, Kelly.
That'll be one of us.
And Ungerer as well. But I think Coxey for the touchdown strikes, certainly. I think that's his guy. And if Peters is banged up or out, I like him even more. What is your non-Argos play this week?
My non-Argos is I'm going to take Hamilton. I'm going to take Hamilton to beat Ottawa at home on the money line.
All right. Plus, is it you have it at 168?
Yeah, 168.
All right. Plus 168. All right. Well, that is a rarity.
I think Ottawa. Yeah, I think Ottawa probably celebrated. They're looking past this Hamilton game. Eastern MVP nominee Bo Levi is going to come to the rescue.
Yeah, I see it too. I think that's it. So let's get into our picks for this week. Last week it was a little bit of a struggle. So you had BC. I did not. I had Montreal. We both had Toronto, so we both lost there. You had Winnipeg. I did not, but I had Edmonton. You had Calgary for some inexplicable reason.
Have Calgary?
I don't know why you had Calgary, because I think you swore off picking Edmonton weeks ago.
Yeah, I don't know what would have possessed me to take Calgary there. That was
I am at 33, 22, and 1 after going 1 and 3. And you went 2 and 2. You're 29, 26, and 1.
All right, still within range. I like my move in September, as I like to do.
You do. This is when you went on a streak last year, and because I was up on you big time, and then I fell apart, and you pulled it together. So 3 games this week on the schedule with multiple buys. So Toronto at BC. I am not hedging. I'm going to stick with the Argos. What is your pick?
I would love to hedge that, but I will go for the good of the unity of the podcast. I will stay with my Toronto pick there.
Ottawa at Hamilton. I am going Hamilton. Are you hedging this one?
Oh yeah, I'm Hamilton too.
Okay.
I thought there was going to be a difference. Yeah.
And then Montreal at Calgary. I am going Montreal. Would you like to double down on the Calgary Stampeders?
No, I would like the Calgary Stampeders to close up shop. No, I got to take Montreal there too. Well, that's very disappointing, but I just cannot support Calgary, and I think Montreal bounces back for sure.
Yeah, I see that as a guaranteed win, which means you probably should take Calgary, but I'm certainly not going to do it.
Bet the heads on Calgary for sure.
Friday the 13th, 10 o'clock at night. You can catch Mike Hogan and I on TSN 1050. JB and I will be following that up with our post-game reaction podcast as well. So make sure you catch that one too. The curse of BC Place ends this week. That will just about do it for us on this pregame walkthrough episode of the X's and Argos podcast. For JB, this is Ben Grant saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the